All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our penultimate session for our seminar in public management effectiveness. We have tonight's session, then we have one more Zoom session next week on July 10th, and then that's it for our Zoom sessions. As you all know, our class officially ends next Tuesday, July 11th, and so the remaining assignments, you have two more Canvas essays. You have the Canvas essay number 5 that looks at the models of organizational effectiveness that we've talked about previously last week. And then you also have number 6, which looks at motivation, which is the material that we are going to cover in class tonight. And then you also have your alternative solutions paper as well as your chosen solution paper. So those are the remaining assignments for the class, and those then all need to be submitted no later than midnight on Tuesday, July 11th. And then we'll be all done as a class, and I'll go through and do the final grading and hopefully have all the final grades calculated and ready to go within probably about 48 hours after July 11th. So by about 13th or so, should have all the final grades all done and ready to go. To those of you who've already turned in those last two Canvas essays and or have turned in your alternative solutions paper, your chosen solution paper, thank you very much for that. Those have all been reviewed and returned to you. I'm going to grade them as they come in, but just again to accommodate the fact that you are working on your 698 project, I believe July 7th is kind of the red letter date for you to turn in your first draft of that 698 project. We pushed the remaining assignments to our due date by our last day of July 11th to just kind of give you that time this week if you need it to work on your 698 project. So that's where we currently are in this course. I do thank you for being here on July 4th Eve, and I will try and keep it short tonight so we can get out a little bit early and let you get out there and start your July 4th holiday as soon as possible. So tonight, our topic is going to be motivation in public management. We're going to talk about motivation and its relationship to organizational effectiveness. Before we get into our discussion of motivational theories, are there any questions or any clarifications in terms of the remaining assignments for the course? We all good?
Regarding the last two papers, the alternative solution and the chosen solution, I just want to see like how much overlap is fine, because I feel like the alternative solution, since you're writing about all three, it's going to cover a lot of what happens in the chosen solution paper. I just like some more clarification on that.
Yeah, and there will be overlap between the two. So in your chosen solution paper, as you are talking about which of those three alternatives you chose, or maybe a combination of those three alternatives, you'll just be justifying why that is the most appropriate. So in the alternative solutions paper, you're presenting the three alternatives. You're talking about what they are. You're talking about how they would help to mitigate the problem. You're talking about how they'll be implemented in terms of who will be involved in the implementation, how you might get the buy-in of people who are involved in the effective implementation of those three different solutions. But the alternative solutions paper, you're more or less just laying out, here are three alternatives. Then the chosen solution paper, you'll be selecting one or maybe two, maybe even all three of them, depends on what you decide to select, and then actually justifying why that is the most appropriate way to address the problem. So admittedly, there is going to be some overlap. So some of the information you use in the alternative solutions paper will be helpful for you then in developing your justification for your chosen solution. But the chosen solution is just, here's the solution I'm choosing, and this is why it's the most appropriate of the possible alternatives. Okay. Hopefully that's
helpful. That sheds the light.
Okay, good question. Glad it's helpful. Okay, what we're going to spend our time talking about tonight is obviously, as we said, motivational theories. And you may have covered some of these theories before. We've actually covered some of these theories previously in this class. And so it's kind of information you may have been through. Some of the theories we'll talk about tonight may be new to you. But as always, with everything else in this class, we're always looking at these theories with an eye upon what they mean for effectiveness. How can they help us enhance the effectiveness of our public organizations? And so just from a very commonsensical perspective, we would assume that there is some type of a positive relationship between motivation and effectiveness. Now, admittedly, there may be some intervening variables in that relationship. So motivation may enhance productivity, and productivity then enhances the effectiveness of the organization. It makes it easier for the organization to achieve its stated goals or to create an organizational harmony like you would in an internal process type of model of organizational effectiveness. So sometimes that productivity is kind of the intervening variable between motivation and effectiveness. But the literature really kind of agrees that if we can enhance the motivation of our employees, then they'll become more productive, which will then hopefully allow us to become more effective as an organization. Thus, making motivation a real fundamental topic, not only in public administration, but in all the social sciences. Take courses in psychology, you'll talk a lot about what motivates individual behavior. If you take courses in sociology, you'll talk about what motivates group behavior. If you take courses in political science, you'll talk about what motivates voters, what animates voters enough to get them to the voting booth. You'll talk about what motivates a member of Congress to make the decisions that that member of Congress will make, kind of like a John Kingdon member of Congress decision-making flowchart. So motivation really permeates all the different fields within social sciences, but it certainly is very important for us here in public administration. One of the major takeaways when you look back at the motivation literature is that the literature kind of comes to an agreement that there is no real science of motivation. Motivation is really more of a craft. It's a collection of techniques and ideas and skills and insights that we can then use to help make our employees more productive, to induce them to exert effort on a continuing basis. We also know from the literature that motivating employees can be much more challenging in the public sector as compared to the private sector for many of the reasons we've already talked about multiple times in this class. It's just that constraining nature of government, the constraining character of government, and the overlay of the political environment makes it sometimes challenging for us to properly motivate public employees. But it really is a major focus in the realm of public administration. We see that as we talk about human resource management in our organizations, as we talk about growing human capital, those are all indications of just how important motivation is within our public organizations. So again, it's going to be difficult for us to motivate our employees in the public sector sometimes for a variety of reasons. Number one, the constraints that we've talked about up to this point in time in this class. We have a lot of complexity in our organizations and the way in which our organizations are structured. That complexity can make motivation difficult because it can make it difficult for people to understand how their roles contribute to the overall roles of not just their organization, but how their roles contribute to benefiting the public in general. Complex types of organizations, a lot of rules and regulations and procedures can certainly have a negative impact upon employee motivation. We also know we have a very limited range of incentives that we can use in the public sector. As we had talked about previously, and we'll talk about again tonight, we oftentimes have to focus much more on those intrinsic motivators because we do not have access to the same extrinsic motivators that our private sector counterparts may have access to. Last week, we talked a lot about ambiguity and vagueness in terms of the goals of our organization, the goals of the programs and the policies that we are implementing. We said that ambiguity and the amorphous nature of those rules and the amorphous nature of those policies oftentimes come directly out of the legislating process itself, and that our enabling bodies that pass this enabling legislation, they cannot pass specific legislation because they can't get a majority to agree to those specifics. And so vague, ambiguous legislation will lead to vague and ambiguous rules and regulations governing the implementation of that legislation. The expectations tend to be unstable. The expectations, again, tend to be relatively ambiguous. And the more ambiguous the expectations for employee behavior, the more obviously it'll be difficult to motivate those employees. Cohesion is sometimes a factor in the public sector as well. It's difficult to incentivize people to work cohesively in groups. And so that could be a problem for motivation. And just from an environmental perspective, this negative view that the public tends to hold the bureaucracy in also can have a negative impact upon motivation. If you're consistently told day after day after day that the public sector is inefficient, that the public sector is ineffective, as a member of the public sector, you may start to believe that, and it's going to make it difficult for you to take a lot of pride in working your organization and doing the type of work you need to do to be productive on an everyday basis. It's what Charles Goodsell told us about in his Case for Bureaucracy way back in 1970. And so that negative view of the bureaucracy can also limit our ability to motivate our employees in the public sector. But before we really start to get into a lot of the specific motivational theories, we have to kind of agree upon an accepted definition of what we mean by motivation. And I think we all kind of have a good sense of what motivation is, but in general, work motivation refers to a person's desire to work hard and work well, and to put forth that effort on a consistent basis. And so you've got a couple of different things working there in that definition. Motivation looks at a person's desire to work hard and work well, but it's also this effort that they're putting in that they're going to do consistently. That's not going to just be something they do once in a while. It's an effort that they're going to put in consistently to work hard and to work well. And that's typically what we usually think of when we think about worker motivation. But specifically, how do we measure motivation? How do we measure how motivated an employee is in our organization? Measuring motivation can be difficult because we typically do it through the use of questionnaires and surveys. So you want to see how motivated someone is, you're probably going to ask them questions, and you're going to ask them to tell you their perceptions about motivation, how motivated they are, their opinions about how motivated they are. And whenever you're collecting information on perceptions and opinions, as you know from your research background, sometimes there can be a good deal of measurement error. There's a lot more subjectivity in how we measure that information as opposed to collecting quantitative empirical data. But it's kind of the best tool that we have in order to measure an individual's motivation using these questionnaires. So there are different types of scales that are used to measure worker motivation. The first one is the job motivation scale, which is a questionnaire that really is one of the few direct measures of job motivation, which asks questions such as, on most days on your job, how often does time seem to drag for you? Some people are completely involved in their job. They're absorbed in it night and day. For other people, their job is simply one of several interests. How involved do you feel in your job? How often do you do some extra work for your job that isn't really required of you? Would you say that you work harder, less hard, or about the same as other people who do your type of work in this organization? Again, just ways in which we can get at people's feeling of motivation. Obviously, if they feel that time is dragging for them at work, they're not going to be terribly motivated. If they feel that they're working less hard than other people in the organization, that's probably an indicator of less motivation. A second scale is the work motivation scale, with responses to statements such as, I put forth my best effort to get the job done regardless of difficulties. I am willing to work early, to start work early and stay late to finish a job. It's been hard for me to get very involved in my current job. That is a reverse measure. And so we're assuming that if people say, yes, it's been hard for me to get very involved in my job, then that is a negative indicator for work motivation. Hence the reason why it's a reverse type of measure. I do extra work for my job that really isn't expected of me. And then time seems to drag while I'm on the job, much like in the first survey we had talked about. Again, this is kind of a reverse type of measure. Third questionnaire, third scale is the intrinsic motivation scale. Intrinsic motivation refers to the motivating effects of the work itself. So how motivated are you by the type of work that you are doing on a daily basis? When I do my work well, it gives me a feeling of accomplishment, kind of like that self-actualization growth type of motivator. When I perform my job well, it contributes to my personal growth and development. I feel a great sense of personal satisfaction when I do my job well. Doing my job well increases my self-esteem. So again, kind of those intrinsic feelings of the impacts of doing your job and doing your job well. Then we can also use questionnaires to look at reward expectancies. So we ask questions about people's expectations of rewards using usually true, false types of statements. Producing a high quality of work increases my chances for higher pay. Producing a high quality of work increases my chances for a promotion. So do they really believe that these rewards will materialize if they do achieve these higher levels of performance and productivity? So this is going to relate directly to our discussion later on of Vroom's expectancy theory. And then another one, peer evaluations. So we can have employees evaluate the work motivation of their peers. So fellow employees will evaluate an individual's work motivation along dimensions such as that employee's team attitude, task concentration, how much of a self-starter they are, how independently are they capable of working, how much they identify with the organization, the goals and the mission of the organization. How much job curiosity do they have? Are they just happy doing their job every day, day in and day out, or are they curious about being able to develop additional skills and do additional types of jobs and get additional types of responsibilities? Persistence, professional identification. Again, these are all measures of peers that you'll have other employees make these measurements of their peer workers. So again, just some ways in which we can go about trying to measure how motivated employees are within our organization. The federal government is very interested, believe it or not, in the motivational levels of their employees. And they talk a lot about federal employee engagement. And every year they will produce this study, Merit System Protection Board and Office of Personnel Management will produce this study looking at federal employee engagement. And it's a really interesting study, and especially now, the studies that have been done post-pandemic have really been enlightening in terms of how motivated people are working remotely as compared to how motivated they were when they were actually on a physical site. And I've got this linked in here, but I don't think if I use the link, you'll probably be able to see it. So let me just stop the share and let me instead share out the website. And I have this link provided for us on our Canvas site. So, well, let me share my screen because I don't see it popping up there. So if I share out my screen, let me stop our share here. Okay. And let's see, you should be able to see it as soon as I find it here. Here we go. Okay, hopefully you see 2022 employee survey results. This is this study that we were talking about, looking at the engagement of federal employees and measuring their motivational levels. So essentially what happens is that they send this survey out across the entire federal bureaucracy, and you'll see they ended up getting a pretty good response rate. They got a 63.5% response rate. They sent out a total of, let's see, 2,386 surveys. They got 1,516 usable surveys back, so a 63.5% response rate, which is much higher than the response rate in fiscal year 2021. So that's obviously moving in the right direction. And here's a real quick summary of the results. I'm not going to go through all of this because, again, I have linked this site on our Canvas site, so you can go whenever you have the time and go through these results on your own. But some of the most positive items that they received responses on, question A9, it's important to me that my work contribute to the common good. 93% of respondents agreed with that. So that kind of clues us into what we call the public service attribution, that these are people who are very much committed to working for the public good. And they feel that what they are doing really does contribute to the public good. If you feel what you're doing contributes to the public good and you are committed to enhancing the public good, that's a good indicator of motivation. My supervisor holds me accountable for achieving results, 92%. I am held accountable for the quality of work I produce, 92%. So people really do know the accountability mechanisms that exist for them in terms of the work they're doing on a daily basis. Employees in my work unit contribute positively to my agency's performance, 91%. Employees in my work unit meet the needs of our customers, 90%. So people feel pretty strongly that people in their work unit are high performing workers, that they're contributing to the organization, and that they're meeting the needs of people who come into contact with those organizations. On the downside, though, some of the negative items that they saw, question 12, continually changing work priorities make it difficult for me to produce high quality work. So different expectations that are changing all the time makes it difficult for them to be productive. Employees in my work unit are typically under too much pressure to meet work goals. Only 26% agreed that their workload is reasonable. So most people feel that they are overworked and need their workload reduced. Not surprising. Management involves employees in decisions that affect their work, only 25%. So only a quarter feel that management is really truly engaging in what we call participative types of management and leadership. And if you remember when we talked about people like Lewin and people who looked at autocratic versus democratic leadership styles, this is an example of more of an autocratic approach where they're not engaging in participative management and leadership. And then in my work unit, differences in performance are recognized in a meaningful way, only 24%. So if people feel that performance is not being rewarded fairly and equitably, that's going to have a very negative impact upon motivation. And we'll see that as we talk about the differences between procedural and distributive justice in a few minutes as we go through the literature. Some of the ways in which the results are better than they were in 2021, some of the biggest increases: managers promote communication among different work units, that went up by 3%. I can disclose a suspected violation of any law, rule, or regulation without fear of reprisal, that went up 2%. We kind of wish it would be higher than 73%, but right now it's at 73% agreeing with that. My organization is successful at accomplishing its mission, 81%, that went up by 1%. High level of respect for my organization's senior leaders actually went up 1%, which is good because for many years that was going down. So kind of arrested that pattern. And my work unit has job relevant knowledge and skills necessary to accomplish goals, 82%. And we'll talk tonight about some of the other factors that are important in enhancing performance and productivity beyond just motivation. However, some of those items actually went down from 2021. My work unit differences in performance are recognized in a meaningful way. That is worse than it was by 6% in 2021. So that's a problem, obviously. Employees are protected from health and safety standards on the job. That also is more negative than it was. And again, a lot of that is tied to the pandemic. And then you can read through all the others on your own. I don't want to waste too much time on it. But one of the ultimate goals of this survey is to put together what they call a Federal Employee Engagement Index score. And that engagement index score is meant to measure how engaged people are in their jobs on an everyday basis. And so they measure engagement and the factors that contribute to engagement in an index made up of 3 different factors. One factor is a factor they call leaders lead. And the leaders lead factor looks at essentially how effective leaders are and how effective their leadership style is. Are they effective, proactive leaders, or are they more the laissez-faire leadership, kind of a hands-off type of approach? So how effectively are they leading in a proactive way? How good the supervisors are in terms of how clear the information and communication is coming from supervisors, and then an individual intrinsic work experience. So how much do they value what they are doing on a daily basis? And you can see those percentages, those 3 factors within that engagement index score are good. They could be better. 68% leaders lead, 85% with a positive view of supervisors, 77% that have this intrinsic feeling of self-worth of their jobs. overall global employee satisfaction rate about 70%. So about 70% of federal employees are satisfied with their jobs in their current organizations. And then you can go through and read, they go through item by item, show you every single item result. One of the interesting things that they also do in this study is they will run crosstabs looking at different types of organizations. And so they'll break organizations down by the size of the organization, and they'll measure employee engagement, employee satisfaction, employee motivation across each one of the different sizes of organizations. And routinely, what we see every single year is employees who work in smaller organizations tend to have higher scores in terms of motivation and satisfaction than people who work in larger organizations. That's not terribly surprising to us, but one of the organizations that always has the highest employee engagement score is I always get it wrong, the Marine Mammal Conservation Commission, I believe it's called, made up of 12 marine biologists. Very small organization, very cohesive organization. They have nearly 100% rates in terms of employee engagement, motivation, and satisfaction. Housing and urban development tends to have much lower scores. Health and human services, of all the large organizations, it's health and human services that typically tends to have relatively strong scores. NASA tends to have very strong scores as well, but usually there's a direct correlation between the size of the organization and how motivated, engaged, and satisfied employees are. But it's just a really interesting thing to look at for the federal government, because it really does give us some indication of how engaged our federal employees are in their jobs, and then some of the different parts of their jobs that they're more satisfied with as compared to other parts of their employment. So I'll leave it at that. Again, the link is on our site, so you can go and take a look at it. But I think every year it's a really interesting insight into the motivation and engagement level of our federal employees. So let me go back into our slides now and move along. Again, you can just look at that at your convenience, but it's there for you. So tonight we're going to be looking at motivation. But we also have to recognize that motivation alone is not enough to determine performance. It's that old saying of necessary but yet not sufficient. So motivation is a necessary factor in performance, in predicting employee performance, but it is not solely sufficient. As we know, in addition to motivation, in order for people to perform well in their positions, they must have the abilities, they must have the right knowledge, skills, and abilities to do the job. They need to have the right training, the right amount, and the right type of training and development. They need to be prepared for tasks so that they know what they are doing and are able to hit the ground running. And people who are more motivated and tend to be more productive are also people who believe that if they put in the effort, they're going to be able to achieve their desired level of performance. So this whole idea of how much you believe in yourself, how much you believe that if you put the effort in, then that effort will then lead to your desired level of performance. Obviously, the more you believe in yourself, the more productive you'll probably end up being. So motivation is just one of many different factors that can help determine the productivity and the performance of employees. But for tonight, we are focusing primarily on work motivation. And there is a very large and very healthy database of literature that looks at different theories of work motivation. And typically what the literature will do is it'll divide up these motivation theories into two different categories. There are content-based theories and there are process-based theories. Content-based motivational theories are concerned with analyzing the needs, motives, and rewards that affect an employee's motivation level. Process-oriented theories will look at the psychological and behavioral processes that underpin motivation. So we're talking about the needs and motives that will make someone more productive. We're looking at content theories. When you're looking at the processes in place to enhance motivation, we are looking at process-based motivational theories. So two different categories. And just for our purposes, our limited time tonight, we're only going to talk about 4 content theories and compare them to 4 process-based theories. In our content theories, the 4 we're going to look at tonight, 2 of them we've already talked about briefly in this class, and the other 2 you probably have run into in other courses in the program. So we're going to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a content-based type of theory, Douglas McGregor's theory X and theory Y, Herzberg's 2-factor theory, and McClelland's needs-based model. Those could be the 4 content-based theories we're going to look at in terms of the work motivation theories that look at the content of motivation. So Maslow, we've talked about before. You've talked about it probably ad nauseum throughout your time in the program. So you're very familiar with Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs and what it means for motivation. We know that the bottom 4 needs are what we call the deficiency needs, and people are motivated to fill deficiencies in these needs. And that's what motivates an individual. Self-actualization is the growth-based need. And so people here are not being motivated by a deficiency, but rather they are being motivated by the perceived need to grow as a human being, the perceived need to self-actualize and to become all that you can be. So Maslow contributes our understanding of motivation through this needs type of analysis. If there are deficiencies, you will be motivated to try and fill those deficiencies. Once those deficiencies are filled, you're going to then probably be motivated by the desire to grow as an individual, the desire to self-actualize and become all that you can be. Douglas McGregor, who we've also talked about and you're very familiar with his theory X and his theory Y, contrasts the nature of employees. Theory X says that people are lazy, they're not very motivated, they're not very intelligent, they're not very creative. And it assumes that workers don't have the capacity for self-motivation. It assumes that because employees don't have the capacity to self-motivate, it's up to the organization to control them and to direct their activities in a very classical theory X organization type of manner. But as you know, with Douglas McGregor, he says the majority of our organizations are theory X, but the majority of our employees tend to be theory Y. And in theory Y, we are kind of looking at those higher order needs. And so in theory Y, we are saying that people have the ability to self-motivate. And so what organizations need to do is they need to create jobs that are more interesting, that offer more room for development and growth on the part of individual employees, that allow employees to seek out responsibility and seek out higher levels of accountability. And it's up to the organization to be a theory Y organization to then allow these individual employees to, in essence, self-motivate and to find their own motivations. And so it's a much kinder, gentler view of organizations and individual employees. So our more motivated organizations are those organizations that treat their employees as theory Y employees, as opposed to treating them as theory X employees. It's allowing employees to find their way through their maturation and their personal growth process, as Chris Argyris would tell us. Then we have Herzberg's 2-factor theory, which is an interesting one because, as you probably know, what Herzberg does is Herzberg differentiates between what he calls motivators and hygiene factors. With motivators, motivators are intrinsic incentives, things such as an employee's interest in their work, an employee's desire for achievement, these kind of higher order types of intrinsic needs. Those higher order intrinsic needs are what motivates employees to be more productive. Herzberg contrasts that with what he calls his hygiene factors. Hygiene factors are those extrinsic incentives, things such as monetary rewards, things such as organizational conditions. Those things, those extrinsic types of factors, will only help to prevent job dissatisfaction, but they will not motivate employees. So hygiene factors only prevent dissatisfaction. But we have to have those motivators in order to increase motivation. So when we look at those intrinsic types of factors, those are the ones that really motivate employees. Extrinsic factors such as hygiene factors don't motivate. They will just merely keep an employee more satisfied, but will not necessarily make that employee more productive and more motivated to work harder. So again, this fares very well in the public sector, and this is something we like to hear in the public sector, because we oftentimes don't have those extrinsic types of factors. We have to rely upon those intrinsic factors to motivate our employees. And then there's McClellan and McClellan's needs-based model. McClellan describes for us 3 different types of motivational needs. People can be motivated by an achievement motivation, an authority motivation, or an affiliation motivation. The achievement motivation is what both McGregor as well as Maslow talked to us about. This is the growth. This is the self-actualization, being all that you can be. Some people are going to be motivated by the desire to achieve. The authority motivation is something that's more common to managers as opposed to employees. People with the authority motivation are going to be motivated by the opportunity to build their power base and to build their power resources and to enhance the formal authority that they have within the organization. And then the third motivator is affiliation motivation. And so this is kind of that sense of that need for belonging, that need for esteem. That's an affiliation motivation. The need to belong to something, the need to belong to those groups that Elton Mayo tells us about in his social organizations work. According to McClellan, when you look at these 3 different motivators, the one that is usually true for most employees is achievement motivation. Most employees tend to be motivated by achievement. And this motivation for achievement is a dynamic restlessness to achieve mastery over one's environment through success at achieving goals through using one's own cunning, ability, and effort. That's what he considers to be achievement. And that's what's going to motivate people. People are going to be motivated to try and obtain mastery over their environment. For managers, they may be more motivated by the authority power motivator. For employees with less emotional maturity, they may be more motivated by affiliation. But most of our employees are motivated by the achievement motivator, which again helps us in the public sector. Because if we can give people the room to develop their skills and to self-govern and to self-direct what they do on a daily basis, that will motivate those employees within our organization. So the focus really is on helping people find the path they need toward achievement. And that's how we motivate our employees. If you want to kind of compare these 4 different content theories of motivations to each other, Maslow to McGregor to Herzberg to McClellan, you can kind of see how they line up with each other. And so we're looking at Maslow, we're looking at those true deficiency types of needs, like the need for love and safety and should be physiological needs. Those needs line up well with McGregor and his theory X. They line up well with Herzberg and hygiene factors, and they line up well with affiliation and power motivators under McClellan. If you look at the self-actualization apex of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, that lines up well with McGregor's theory Y, which lines up well with Herzberg's motivating factors, which lines up well with McClellan and his idea of achievement motivation. So it kind of just shows you how the 4 of those really do relate well to each other. But those are what we refer to as kind of our content-based types of motivational theories. But one thing we do know is that if employees feel that they are on the losing end of the transaction with their organization. So if you think about employees and the relationship with the organization, kind of like a Chester Barnard and kind of like this transactional type of relationship. Employees will provide contributions to the organization, as Barnard tells us. Those contributions, those job inputs are things such as their time, their effort, their ability, their commitment to the organization, their flexibility, their honesty, their collegiality, the amount of heart that they put into the job, their integrity, the amount of respect that they give to the job, to the organization, and to others. Those are inputs, contributions that employees give to the organization. In return, they then get outputs from the organization, things such as a paycheck, benefits, vacation time, security, recognition for their efforts, responsibility, respect, a sense of purpose, a sense of achievement, like McClellan. So you've got these inputs going in, you've got these outputs that are then coming out. The problem is whenever the inputs and the outputs are tipped, and whenever people feel that they are putting too much effort in compared to what they are getting out of the organization, if they have a perception that their pay and their benefits and their rewards are not matching the effort they are putting in, obviously that's when you're going to end up getting reduced input. You're going to end up getting less commitment from the employee to the organization, overall less motivation to provide effort to accomplish the goals of the organization. So employees will make this calculus, this decision, based upon their inputs compared to the outputs they're getting from the organization. When they're kind of looking at this equity in terms of inputs and outputs that they're getting from the organization, one of the things that we know that has a big impact upon motivation is if people feel that they're being treated equally, if they're being treated in an equitable manner, they will be more likely to be motivated to work toward organizational goals. If they feel that there's a lot of inequity in the way in which they are being treated, that's when we're going to have problems with motivation. So equity really speaks to this notion of organizational justice. How just do they feel the organization is in the way in which it's distributing intrinsic and extrinsic motivators? And there are two different types of justice that we see in organizations. There's what's called distributive justice versus procedural justice. Distributive justice speaks to the fairness and equity in the distribution of rewards and resources. So if you think back to what we had talked about just a few minutes ago when we looked at that federal employee engagement study, we said one of the areas where federal employees usually score very low on is their belief that performance is being rewarded adequately and appropriately. The majority of employees feel that performance is not being equitably rewarded. That's this idea of distributive justice. They don't feel that there's fairness or equity in how rewards and resources are being distributed. Then there's what's called procedural justice. Procedural justice looks at the fairness with which people feel employees are treated with organizational processes such as decision-making. So how fair are the processes that are being used to then distribute the rewards within the organization? What we have learned is that obviously if people feel there's both distributive as well as procedural justice, that will be very strongly correlated with positive work-related attitudes and therefore higher levels of motivation and then higher levels of productivity and performance. So it's important that organizations look at not just who's getting the rewards, but the process through which those rewards are being allocated. And employees must really feel that those processes are valid and equitable and fair. Which then kind of segues into our second category of work motivation theories, which are what we call our process-oriented theories. And just like with our content-oriented theories, we've talked about four main theories. Here in process-oriented theories, we're going to talk about four main theories as well. Broom, Skinner, Bandura, and Locke. And again, some of these you have run into before, especially if you were a psychology major. I'm sure you've hit on some of these theories before. The first one from Paul Vroom is called expectancy theory. And we've made mention of this in previous class sessions here in this course. But the primary claim here in expectancy theory is that an individual considering an outcome will sum up all the values of all the outcomes that can result from a certain course of action and will then weigh each outcome by the probability of its occurrence. Essentially, what we are saying is that employees are going to act kind of under classic utilitarian premises, and that an employee is going to act in a rational, self-interested way. If we assume that an employee is a rational, self-interested actor, we will assume that an employee will take actions to try and maximize the benefits of a given course of action, while at the same time trying to minimize the costs. Your classic cost-benefit analysis, the greater the benefits compared to the cost, the better the benefit-cost ratio looks, and the more likely it is that we will undertake that type of an activity. So Vroom's expectancy theory is predicated on three main ideas: what's called valences, expectancies, and instrumentalities. Valence refers to the emotional orientation that people hold with respect to certain types of outcomes and rewards. So how important is pay as a reward for that individual? How important is free time through maybe flex time for that employee? How important is it to have a challenge in order to be able to try and grow as an individual, to be challenged in your job? How much value someone places on a potential outcome is what's referred to as the valence level. So we need to know the valence level that employees place upon different possible outcomes. The second main concept in expectancy theory is what we call expectancies. And this refers to an employee's expectation about how confident they are that if they put in this amount of effort, they will end up achieving this level of performance or productivity. So how confident are they that if they put the effort in, they're going to achieve that level of performance? That's what's called the expectancy level for that employee. And then the third main concept is what's called instrumentality. Instrumentality speaks to the perception of employees with respect to whether outcomes or rewards will actually result from achieving that level of performance. So if an employer says, you will get this reward if you achieve this level of performance, how confident are employees that the employer is actually going to make good on that promise? So the potential that the employee is actually going to make good on the promise they make to their employee is what's known as instrumentality. So expectancy theory is based upon valences, expectancies, as well as instrumentalities. So how does it work? Vroom has his formula for expectancy theory where he says, performance or productivity is a function of, so the amount of effort that someone is going to put into a job is a function of, that's what the F is on the side, the left side of the formula. So F is for function of. Within your brackets, you have E to P. This is the probability that an employee feels that if they put in a certain amount of effort, that that effort will result in achieving a certain level of performance. So this really speaks to expectancies. So this is the expectancy on the part of that employee. Multiplied times the probability that achieving that level of performance will then result in an outcome that has been promised to that employee. That is more your instrumentality. And then that thing gets multiplied by your V, which is your valence. So in other words, let's say that an employer tells an employee, we need to get this project done by Monday. So that's the desired performance level, to get this project done by Monday morning. The employee knows that there is an amount of effort that they could put in to getting this project done by Monday. And that effort may be to come in and work on Saturday and Sunday. That's the effort. So in determining whether or not they will put that effort in and will come in and work on Saturday and Sunday to get this project done, we have to know that individual employees' expectations. Do they believe that if they do come in on Saturday and Sunday, what's the probability that that level of effort will lead to the desired level of performance? If I come in and work all day on Saturday and Sunday, will I get this project done by Monday morning? Is it a 50-50 chance? Is it 70-30? Is it 90-10? Obviously, the higher percentage, the more likely they are to put in that effort. Then the PDO stands for the likelihood that if you achieve that level of performance, what's the likelihood that you will then get this outcome? So perhaps the manager says that if you get this project done, then you will be recognized as employee of the month. I don't know, something, employee of the month. That's the outcome. But what's the chance? How much do we trust the employer that if we do get this project done, that the employer will then name us as employee of the month? Is it 50-50? Is it 70-30? Is it 90-10? How confident are we in our employer making good on their promises? That's instrumentality. So the P to O is the instrumentality. And then how much value do we place on being named employee of the month? That's the valence level. So we'll take expectancies, instrumentalities, and valence levels into account in determining how much effort an employee is going to put in a certain type of job or a certain type of activity. Well, you know, I'm really big on the so what question. So it's a really fun and interesting theory, but so what? You know, what does it mean? What are the practical implications for managers? The practical implication for a manager in trying to motivate their employees is, for valence, managers must understand what individuals value, the types of intrinsic and extrinsic rewards that they actually place a value upon. And that will differ depending upon what employee you are dealing with. So you need to communicate with and understand and know your employees. You have to know expectancy levels on the part of your employees as well. Expectancies are based upon confidence and ability, so it's important to accurately assess the skills and the strengths and the weaknesses of your employees and how likely it is that this person comes in Saturday and Sunday that they will get this project done by Monday morning. And then instrumentality, managers need to come through on their promises. They need to make good on the outcomes that they have promised to their employees. So for Vroom and expectancy theory, it means that we can use expectancy theory to predict the amount of effort that employees are going to put in to a job in order to try and achieve their desired level of performance. Which means we have to know the relationship between performance and pay, how important job security is, how important promotion is, how important all these different incentives are to our employees to understand whether they're important enough for those employees to put in the effort to then achieve levels of performance that will then lead to those outcomes that they have been promised. So as a process-oriented theory, what Vroom is doing is he's giving us some empirical basis that we can use to then motivate our employees to determine how we can enhance the amount of effort that the employee is going to put in to doing a specific type of a job. Now, it's obviously unlikely that employees are going to sit down and calculate, well, I'm 80% confident that I'm going to be able to get the job done. I'm 40% confident that the manager is going to make good on their promises. It's probably not going to be that quantitative, but kind of from a more qualitative, subjective level, instrumentalities, expectancies, and valence levels are three factors that employees will consider in terms of how much effort to put into a job, how motivated they are to exert this effort on a consistent and ongoing basis. Then for all those of you who took psychology classes, I'm sure you're very familiar with our good friend B.F. Skinner and Skinner's operant conditioning model. Skinner's operant conditioning model recognizes that people will react based upon certain types of consequences that they receive. Behaviors are produced and operate in our environment and generate certain types of consequences. So when people receive a consequence, it can actually shape the behavior that they are going to engage in. Because we, like animals, we will repeat or drop behaviors in response to those consequences. Positive consequences will induce us to continue or expand the behavior. negative consequences will induce us to shy away from or stop another type of behavior. So in operant conditioning, we're using consequences to modify the occurrence and form of behavior on the part of employees. It really looks at this relationship between behavior and contingencies of reinforcements, negative and positive types of reinforcements. What we know, obviously, in the public administration literature is that positive reinforcement is usually the most efficient means of influencing an employee's behavior. Negative reinforcement punishment is usually less effective and less efficient. So typically we try and focus on positive types of reinforcement. How the reinforcement is given can also have an impact upon the behavior itself and how someone is going to internalize that behavior, how often they're going to engage in that behavior. What we have found is what we call an intermittent reinforcement schedule, where reinforcement is provided on an intermittent basis, an unpredictable type of basis. That oftentimes leads to more long-term acquisition of certain types of behaviors. That people are more likely to continue those behaviors over time if they are faced with an intermittent positive reinforcement schedule. It's kind of like in weight training. You're always told in weight training not to do the same exercises in the same order day after day. Your muscles get used to it, and so you want to vary your weight training from day to day. Well, it's the same type of thing here. You vary the reinforcement, the period of time between reinforcements. If you vary that time, it may take you longer for the employee to initiate the behavior, but that behavior is going to last longer and be done on a much more consistent and ongoing basis. But in operant conditioning, Skinner is essentially telling us that behavior is a function of the consequences of that behavior. Bandura kind of builds off of operant conditioning with what's referred to as his social learning theory. Social learning theory, again, builds off of operant conditioning in ways in which we can modify the behavior of individuals. But it puts a much greater emphasis on internal cognitive processes, such as the setting of goals and senses of self-efficacy, than on just the consequences and the reinforcements that are being provided. Essentially, what we are saying in social learning theory is that we want to understand how people process information, their cognitive processes, how they learn information, and then how that learning of information can then engender behavior changes. So in social learning theory, we understand that people learn in a variety of different ways, other than just getting outside reinforcement. People can learn in ways such as the modeling of behaviors of others. So if leaders and managers can role model behavior, then employees oftentimes can learn through that role modeling type of process. People also can tend to learn through vicarious experiences. So someone doesn't necessarily have to go through the experience themselves. They can live vicariously through someone else. So someone else goes through that experience. They witness that person going through that experience. They learn from that other person going from that through that experience in a very vicarious type of way. People learn through what's called mental rehearsal and imagery. And so if you've ever had to give a presentation or something that you're uncomfortable with or that you're nervous about, you're oftentimes going to mentally rehearse that over and over in your mind. That is a learning process that will then shape your future behavior. And affording people the opportunity to engage in self-management in setting their own goals will also help people learn and will then help people shape their own behaviors. Again, this is very much in line with participative leadership and management, but as opposed to operant conditioning, we're not just looking at the external reinforcements, we're really looking at the cognitive processes and how people are actually learning, and different people learn differently. Different people use different processes to learn and grow as individuals, and that will then shape how they then engage in behavior in the future. And then building off some of the information we talked about last week, we have Edwin Locke and what's called goal setting theory. Edwin Locke argues that we can motivate employees through the setting of goals, providing goals for employees to achieve. And we have unachieved goals that will then create this tension, and people will then be motivated to put the work and the effort in to try and achieve those unachieved goals. Locke makes the argument in goal setting theory that difficult goals lead to higher performance levels than easy goals. That the more difficult the goal, the more motivated individuals will be to accomplish that goal. Now, again, you've got this balance that you have to work with. If a goal is too difficult, people may get frustrated and they may want to walk away from that goal. If the goal is too easy, it'll just be too simple to accomplish and you won't achieve the motivation levels that you want to try and achieve. But once you establish a difficult goal, it will then focus behavior and motivate individuals to try and achieve that difficult goal. But people have to be committed to those goals. If people are not committed to those goals, obviously those goals will not serve as good motivators. And feedback is imperative. That you need to provide feedback toward the accomplishment of this goal so people know if they're going down the right path to achieving the goal. As the value of the goal increases, typically the commitment to that goal increases as well. According to Locke, to motivate employees, goals are important because goals may direct the employee's attention on the task at hand. Goals can serve to intensify the efforts of that individual employee. Goals can intensify the persistence of effort toward the achievement of those goals. And difficult goals can also spark creativity and innovation in problem solving. So there are a lot of advantages to assigning difficult goals because that tends to motivate employees more than simple goals or having no goals at all. They really provide this sense of purpose and create standards that we can then use to evaluate performance. If we don't have any goals, we're not going to be able to have effective performance evaluation processes. As we know, the performance evaluation process is really the keystone of the entire human resource management process within organizations. So Locke tells us it's important for us to establish these goals, communicate these goals, make sure that our goals are things that our employees can be committed toward, and make sure our goals are difficult enough that people have something to work toward in accomplishing those goals, which means we need to have leadership and management support in the establishment of these goals. The greater the success in achieving a difficult goal, the greater the satisfaction for the employee, the more motivated that employee will be to achieve goals in the future. The paradoxical situation here is more difficult goals are less likely to be achieved, which may leave people unsatisfied. But this lack of satisfaction in turn will then foster ambition and will then push people to strive harder and to achieve more goals and to work harder to achieve those goals in the future. The most appropriate types of goals for organizations to set will be qualitative and quantitative goals, goals that mix both qualitative as well as quantitative indicators, kind of this mixed methodology that is very much the norm across the entire field of the social sciences. And it's also important to assign responsibility for the achievement of goals. This is one of the problems we talked about last week with strategic planning, is that we'll come up with these plans, we'll come up with these goals, but we'll never then actually assign people responsibility and accountability for the achievement of these goals in our strategic plan. Also, as we were saying, these goals, we need to empower our employees, develop strategies and tactics for achieving the goals. And so instead of prescribing, this is exactly how you'll go about achieving the goal, we empower our employees to work on developing their own strategies for achieving these goals. Again, we have to have effective leadership and management support in setting these goals. As we said before, you need to have this feedback loop so that employees can know if they're going in the wrong direction, they can then reorient in terms of finding a new strategy to achieve those goals. People need to be committed to the goals. We need to have management commitment. We also need to have employee commitment. We also need to be very careful of goal overload. If we just have a whole list of goals, The multiplicity of goals can lead to a lot of conflict between the goals, and it could be very difficult for people to sort out which goal to achieve at which point in time. Sometimes goals can be conflicting with each other. So you want to avoid having too many goals, avoid goal overload. As we said, it's important for us to try and mix qualitative as well as quantitative indicators into the goals that we are establishing. So what does motivation theory tell us in terms of the directions in the literature in motivation theory? Well, one thing we have seen across all the literature in motivation theory is that there is no one conclusive explanation of motivation. It gets back to my favorite answer to every question: it depends. Motivation theory really is rooted in a contextual type of orientation. The type of motivational theory we are going to use will depend upon the employee that we are dealing with, will depend upon the situation in which we find ourselves. And we'll see this even more next week when we get into our discussion of leadership for effectiveness in organizations. Researchers agree that the theory is kind of in a disorderly state. Again, we have to have separate theories to apply in different settings. There's no panacea, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Looking for that universal theory has really proven fruitless in the literature. We really are looking for that middle range approach, whereby we can apply specific approaches and specific strategies in specific contexts and specific situations. It really calls for the development of taxonomies, different types of motivational strategies, different types of settings. This approach is most appropriate in this setting. This approach may be more appropriate in this setting. But although the literature is disjointed, it is still useful in allowing us to understand some of the complexities within this world of motivation. We can understand the importance of goals. We can understand the importance of self-actualization. We can understand the importance of intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards. We can understand the importance of empowerment and allowing people self-direction and self-governance in the achievement of these goals and in the achievement of the goals of the organization. Again, hopefully looking at the content-based theories and the process-based theories gives us a little insight in terms of how we can best motivate our employees to help achieve the goals of our organization, whatever those goals may be. But we know that oftentimes when we are motivating employees, motivation is predicated upon these incentives. Like Barnard tells us, we provide a set of incentives, inducements, to our employees to then induce them to put forth effort on a consistent basis, to induce them to be motivated to work. We know that in the public sector, we're much more likely to focus on intrinsic motivators as opposed to the extrinsic motivators that we see in the private sector. We know we have a lot of limitations in terms of civil service regulations. We have limitations in terms of unionization and the importance of collective bargaining agreements. We also have a lot of variety in government organizations. Not every government organization is the same. Most government organizations pay for performance plans have not worked out very well, but there have been some notable exceptions. Some organizations pay for performance plans that are well established and have been around for quite some time. So when we are looking at how we motivate employees with incentives, we know that it's a messier process in the public sector as compared to the private sector. That's why we tend to see people say that private sector employees tend to be more motivated than their public sector counterparts. Now, the research kind of is conflicted on this issue of are public or private sector employees more motivated. Typically, we do tend to see higher satisfaction levels and sometimes higher motivational levels in the private sector, but the motivational levels and satisfaction levels in the public sector are very high as well. So even if the private sector might be a little bit higher, the difference is not a statistically significant difference. And that public employees tend to report that they are highly motivated and they are highly satisfied in their jobs. So despite all the constraints and limitations and frustrations associated with the public sector, public employees still tend to seem to be relatively highly motivated. But it's a tricky situation in the public sector because of the limitations we have on the incentives that we can provide. So Barnard, go back to Barnard again, Chester Barnard tells us that there are different types of incentives that we can provide to our employees to motivate them to exert effort on a consistent basis. There are what we call worker-specific incentives, and then there are non-worker specific incentives. So in terms of our specific incentives, there are things such as material incentives. Material incentives could be things like pay, things like bonus pay, benefits. Those are material types of incentives. Very limited to do that in the public sector. Then you could have non-material incentives, things such as recognition and achievement. You can have work conditions. And so work conditions that are comfortable, work conditions that are safe, work conditions that are customary. Those can all be worker-specific incentives. But with worker-specific incentives, these are incentives that apply directly to the individual employee and can be different between different employees. The other category are your non-specific incentives. So things such as freedom from hostility. Freedom from hostility is more of a workplace issue, and it doesn't really pertain specifically to one employee or one position. It doesn't treat different employees differently depending upon their different types of needs. Herbert Simon, who is again another big author in the public administration literature, tells us that incentives will differ depending upon the type of employee that we are dealing with. So the incentives that usually work best for employees are incentives such as compensation, prestige, social belonging, promotional types of opportunities. Those are the types of incentives that work for employees. So if you think back to McClellan, this is where we will be talking about more of the achievement and more of the affiliation types of motivators. For employers, the incentives that tend to work better are power and authority. And so this goes back to McClellan and his authority-based types of motivators. So different types of motivators, different types of incentives tend to work differently depending upon if you're trying to motivate employees versus employers. But even when you are dealing with just employees, there are different types of employees who will be motivated by different types of incentives. And one of the theories I think really illustrates that very nicely for us is this theory from Anthony Downs. And Anthony Downs introduces us to what he calls his bureau ideologies. And in Downs's bureau ideologies, he introduces us to 5 different categories of employees who are all motivated by different types of incentives. The first category of employee that Downs identifies for us is what he calls the climber. According to Downs, a climber is oftentimes a younger employee who may be newer to the organization, and that employee is going to be motivated by the opportunity to move up the organizational ladder. So they're going to be very motivated by promotional opportunities. The problem with climbers is that since they are being motivated by incentives such as promotional opportunities, if the organization is not providing the correct promotional opportunities that these climbers place a high valence level on, these climbers will then engage in what Downs calls jumping. They will jump to another organization that promises the promotional opportunities that they want. Climbers tend to be very much free agents. They're younger employees looking for promotions, and they can jump from organization to organization. But they are motivated by the incentive of promotional opportunities. Your second employee is what's known as a conserver. Conserver tends to be your more veteran employees. These are the employees who have been in the organization for a longer period of time. Since they've been in the organization for a longer period of time, they have already accumulated a lot of the perks of the office. So they've already accumulated a lot in their current position. They are motivated by conserving what they have already accumulated. And so they can be incentivized, they can be motivated by protecting what they currently have. So they are not going to be as motivated with a promotional opportunity as a climber may be. So these are people, these conservatives have been in the organization much longer, the veterans who have already accumulated a lot of the perks of the job. Then your third type of employee, according to Downs, is what he calls your zealot. A zealot is an employee who is kind of a single issue employee. This is an employee who is a zealot, who is someone who is very concerned about a singular issue, and they are there to try and promote that issue. They tend to be motivated by allowing them opportunities to focus on that issue. And so if their work can be organized around this issue and doing work that has some relationship to this issue that they are so passionate about, that's the incentive that is going to motivate them to be more productive. Those are what you call your zealots. Then your fourth type of employee is what he calls your advocate. Advocates really believe in their departments, their units, and their divisions. They become advocates, they become spokespeople for their units and for their divisions. So they are incentivized and they are motivated to get resources for their departments and for their divisions. And so if you're a college dean, you may be an advocate for your college. And so most of your time is spent going out there trying to get faculty lines, going out there trying to get resources for faculty research, trying to get resources for student research, trying to enhance student enrollment to bring more revenue into the college. That would be the example of being an advocate. And then your fifth category, as Downs refers to them, are statesmen. We would say statespeople, I guess, today, but Downs back in the 67 referred to them as statesmen. These are people who are very concerned about public interest. They are in this position for the purpose of enhancing public interest, of serving public society and the public good as a whole. So they are incentivized and are motivated through opportunities to give back to the community, to enhance the community and to make the quality of life for people in the community better. Those are what he referred to as his statesmen. Again, the big so what question here is it just illustrates you have different types of employees who respond differently to different types of incentives. They will have different valence levels for these different types of incentives. And as managers and leaders, we need to know what valence levels they place in all these different incentives so that we are providing the right incentives with the right valence levels in order to motivate these individuals. We have to know their valence levels that they have on outcomes. We have to know their expectancies, how confident they are in their abilities to achieve what they want to achieve. We have to have instrumentality whereby we are giving them, carrying through on these incentives that we have promised them for achieving a certain level of performance or productivity. So again, it tells us it's complex in the public sector for us to be able to motivate our employees, because even within the public sector, different public employees act and behave much differently from each other. So what James Perry and others tell us is the basic understanding here is that it's oftentimes more difficult to motivate people in the public sector as compared to the private sector, because we oftentimes lack the same tools that our private sector counterparts have in motivating our employees. This next chart allows us to assess the motivators of our employees across several different dimensions. And again, whenever we are assessing what motivates our employees, we're going to go back to questionnaires, and we're going to pull this information directly from our employees. So one dimension of motivators that will be important in the public sector is someone's attraction to public affairs. So how attracted are they to public service? How attracted are they to public life? So questionnaire items such as a reverse one, like politics is a dirty word. If people believe politics is a dirty word, they want to stay as far away from politics as they can. Public administration is really ensconced within a political environment. And so that may be someone who may not be a great fit for working in a public organization. The give and take of public policy making does not appeal to me. Again, a reversed issue. So someone who says yes to that is probably someone who is not very much attracted to public affairs, probably will not be motivated in the public sector. I don't care much for politicians. Again, same type of thing as you saw with the first statement. So we can measure someone's attraction to public affairs to help us determine just how motivated they will be working in a public organization. Another dimension we can look at with public employees is the commitment to the public interest. How committed are they to enhancing the public interest? It's hard to get me genuinely interested in what's going on in my community. That's a reverse one. Obviously, if someone agrees with that, not a whole lot of commitment to the public interest. I unselfishly contribute to my community. Meaningful public service is very important to me. I would prefer seeing public officials to do what is best for the community. I consider public service a civic duty. Those are all indicators of someone's commitment to the public interest. What's their compassion level as a public official? Are they rarely moved by the plight of the underprivileged? Another reverse type of indicator. Most social programs are too vital to do without. So, it's difficult for me to contain my feelings when I see people in distress and so on and so on. We're not going to go through all of them, but those are all indicators of someone's compassion toward public interest, compassion toward the public to their fellow members of the public. And how much self-sacrifice does someone have? Making a different society means more to me than personal achievements. I believe in putting duty before self. Doing well financially is definitely more important to me than doing good deeds. Another reversed one. Much of what I do is for a cause bigger than myself. Serving citizens would give me a good feeling even if no one paid me for it, and so on and so on. Self-sacrifice, compassion, commitment to public interest, attraction to public affairs. People who score highly on those questionnaire items are much more likely to respond positively to the limited intrinsic incentives that we have at our disposal to motivate people in public organizations. In short, people who score well on these four dimensions are people who will probably be motivated to perform well and be productive in our public organizations. But the takeaway from this motivation theory literature, I think, is really, there are multiple takeaways. One is that there is no one set of skills or techniques that fits in every single situation in terms of motivating our employees. Every situation is different, every organization is different, every individual is different. I think a second takeaway is that we don't have the same amount of incentives and types of incentives in the public sector as we may have in the private sector. So the people who are working in public organizations need to be the people who value these things such as attraction to public affairs and commitment to public service and the public interest, because those are the types of incentives that they will get in the public sector as compared to high levels of pay or bonus pay or any commissions or any of those types of things that you tend to see in private sector organizations. So it really goes back to my favorite answer. It really does depend. How you motivate employees really depends upon your organization, the situation you find yourselves in, and the individual employee that you are dealing with. But I just wanted to expose you to some of this motivational literature quickly here tonight, because motivation is a major contributor, obviously, to organizational effectiveness. It is not solely sufficient for making your organization effective, but it is one of many characteristics of individuals that will then help the effectiveness of your organization. If you have a highly motivated workforce that has a high level of abilities, that possesses the skills, the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to do the job, that has the preparation and the training to do the job, you need a confluence of all these things flowing together to make your organization effective. But motivation is a very important aspect of organizational effectiveness. Again, I tried to do all this very quickly tonight so I could get you out of here early so you can get out there and enjoy your July 4th since it's almost upon us. Any really quick questions or observations or clarifications on this motivation theory literature? Content versus process-oriented theories. any of this information that you need any clarification or anything on?
No clarification. You did a really good job of explaining it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I know we went through it very quickly, but I think it's fascinating. I love motivational literature. I think there is so much more research to be done in motivation, and motivation literature has been around for decades, but we've really just kind of scraped the tip of the iceberg. And there is so much more for us to learn in terms of motivation. So I think it's a fascinating field, and just kind of wanted to introduce you to it because it is so vital for understanding organizational effectiveness. But what is also vital for understanding organizational effectiveness is leadership. And I know leadership is something that you have talked about before in the program. What I would like to do next week is focus squarely on leadership and its impact upon effectiveness. Take you through some of the leadership theories that you may or may not be familiar with, and talk about different leadership theories and how they can be applied in different situations to make our organizations more effective. So next week, we're going to look squarely at leadership, and then we'll do a quick wrap up of the course and talk about some of the major themes we've covered in the course and some of the primary takeaways I hope you're able to take away with you once this course is over next week. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'll get this recording up either tonight or early tomorrow morning. Hope everyone has a great 4th of July. I look forward to reading your papers as they come in, and then we'll be back together again next Monday for our last session. So thanks everyone. Have a great 4th.
Professor, can I ask you a question, please, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So just to clarify, both papers can be turned in by the 11th, right?
Correct. Yes.
All right. And also the last discussion point is also the one for week 6 is due on the 11th as well.
Correct. Yeah, we actually made the last 2 discussions and the alternative solutions and the chosen solution paper, all that due July 11th by midnight to give you that extra time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And just what was I going to say? The mid-course survey, I just wanted to let you know it's still locked in case you want to open that so we can do that just in case. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, I'll have to check on that. I thought it was open. I'll double check and make sure that it's open. But thanks for letting me know.
All right, no problem. Thank you very much. Have a happy
Thank you. Have a happy
Take
4th.
care.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Professor.
thank you for extending those deadlines for us too. That was super helpful. I really appreciate that.
Sure. I'm glad I could help. I know, the 698 project is a big deal for everyone. It's a lot of work. So hopefully kind of clear the decks for you so you can get through that before you have to worry about these last assignments. So my pleasure to do it.
Yeah, and just so you know, your class is also just as important to us too. It just happens to be very unfortunate we have these like crazy deadlines together. But yeah, this class has been amazing. I'm learning so much already, so I appreciate it. Thank you. Of
Thank you. That means a lot to me. It's great to have that feedback. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
course.
Take care.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good night. Happy
Thanks.
4th.
Have a good night. Happy 4th.